Today in the EU, Commissioner hearings end without conclusions as the real negotiations begin. Tuesday, 12th of November marked the last day of the hearings at the European Parliament, yet no conclusions were reached, in a clear indication that all political parties have laid their cards on the table and are now negotiating over who gets what. Evaluation meetings have been postponed with no timeline set, leaving many unanswered questions, like what is happening behind closed doors and what can we expect from the hearings' conclusions in the coming days. Hello and welcome. I am Evi Kiorri, and this is Today in the EU. So we're recording this episode from the studios in the European Parliament, and to break down what has happened with the hearings so far, I'm joined by Euractiv's politics reporters Nicoletta, Ionta and Magnus, Lund, Nielsen, who have been following most of the sessions for the past 2 weeks. They were 26 in total, guys. That's a lot.
Oh, yeah.
First, what's your experience following these hearings?
First of all, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
It's been tiring, but it's also been interesting. It was something that we were looking forward to for a very long time. And it's been a ride. I mean, last week we had basically every single commissioner. And then yesterday we had all the executive vice presidents. But of course, every single decision yesterday got postponed. So we're looking at basically at a broader timeline, and we're still unsure on what will happen, basically, and when we will have these coordinators meetings to decide whether they want to approve the executive vice presidents of the commission. I mean, the future commission. So yeah.
And Magnus?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a boatload of fun. It's an interesting time in the EU's political calendar because it's only this one time during a 5-year mandate where the European Parliament actually has a living chance of scrutinizing probably the EU executive. And then you could say, well, they haven't really seized the day because it has been a very low-stake affair throughout all, I dare say now, 26 commission hearings. So it has been a mixed bag of goods.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think anyone, just the average person maybe was not watching 3 hours and sometimes 3 hours and a half of a hearing. But to give like this kind of a perspective on what happens is basically like every single committee that is relevant in the portfolio of the commissioner designate basically gets to ask questions, and it becomes this kind of show off from the commissioner designate, and they reply to questions, and it's a huge kind of an event that it's actually quite long, and we have been sitting in those meetings. I mean, in those hearings for like 3 hours, and you are with an insane amount of people. It's very crowded sometimes, and it was, and yeah, that's basically how it is. It's not so fun, actually.
Yeah. And so if you could choose some main points that we should take away from the commissioners' designate hearings, what will these points be?
The hearings have confirmed some of the suspicions that we've had for a while. Some of those suspicions were that we knew that the makeout and the structure, the whole composition of the incoming EU Commission seemed to strike a very delicate, fine balance. And so we have only in very rare cases seen actual sort of attempts from MEPs to sort of go get some of the designates, some of the nominees. It has been very a bloodless, not even sabble-rattling affair mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was kind of an attempt with Vareli, which is the Hungarian commissioner to be. They actually asked more for him to reply to more written questions. And then the evaluation meeting got postponed, and it was actually on Monday. But then, of course, the final evaluation got also postponed. So I think we saw a bit of like more of a bumpy road for Vareli, and that was the only kind of commissioner that faced a bit more of a hard time. But then also yesterday, Ribera, they faced some serious grilling from MEPs, and there is, there are voices in the European Parliament basically wanting to ask her for some more questions. But this is yet to be seen, and we still don't know what is going to happen.
And you said something earlier that we were expecting also to have some results already after the hearings. In the end, the evaluation committee's meetings were postponed, as you just mentioned. Why is this the case? Why do we have this delay?
There's a lot of maneuvering going on between the different political groups. I think I dare say, also being as unbiased as I can be, Ribera didn't do a particularly good job at her hearing yesterday. Talking to people from across the spectrum, mainly left-wing politicians off the record, they also recognized that was not a particularly good showing. We've seen this package deal take shape where all the executive vice presidents are bundled together and to be voted on at a later stage. This later stage, we don't know when is exactly. We know that today, in the early morning, at 9 o'clock, the COP, that is to say all the political chiefs of the European Parliament, they meet. And we do expect that probably coming out of that meeting, we will know a bit more. I, for one, at least, will be waiting after I've gotten a few hours of sleep outside the door to find out what exactly will be happening. What we expect to happen, what we do expect is that the commissioners who are still pending a confirmation will be voted on probably next week. There is a slight chance, theoretical, that they will do it this week. And there's even some talk they might do it even later. But I think the most likely thing to happen is that they will vote on it early next week.
Yeah, exactly. Those were the two options that were floated also on Monday after Valheli. And I mean, either today or next week. And that was kind of what we were getting since the very beginning. I mean, since this week started basically.
Yeah, and all political parties are negotiating right now as we're talking, but we don't know much about what they're trying to get from this process. What are your sources telling you so far? What do they want?
The goal is to get the commission up and running. There is a kind of a knowledge. I mean, there is this shared conviction that we need a commission that is ready, also with what happened in the US and with the election of Donald Trump. And then, of course, the various conflicts that are going on at the moment. There is this, there is this push and there is a willingness to have a commission that's able to operate in that sense.
We know that different political groups have different wishes for changes in the current lineup. We know, for instance, that the socialists have been barking a lot about wanting to take the executive vice presidency out of the Italian commissioner designate Fito's future role. So he would be merely just a regular commissioner instead of being in a ranking position in the new commission. We know that some of the progressive forces also take issue with the Hungarian Commission of Valheli being in charge of also women's reproductive rights, and he failed to provide, I think, substantial answers on that when he was heard in the parliament the other day. So I think there's a list of different parties. Ribera failed to impress today. There's probably maybe going to be some carve-outs also on her portfolio. I know that some progressive forces are also finally not particularly happy about the lack of mention of employment and social affairs in the Romanian nominee Mințatu's role. Her portfolio currently is called People, Skills and Preparedness, which is slightly vague.
And where does this leave us? Are we still in the timeline Ursula von der Leyen has set? Is this pushing things further, or are we going to have finally a College of Commissioners for the next plenary in Strasbourg where they will have to pass the confidence vote?
Coming out of the meetings and the hearings yesterday, it is less certain that we'll reach the December timeline than it has been before. One MEP mentioned earlier, which I thought was a good observation, that it might indeed be a very good idea to postpone the final confirmations of the senior commissioners until next week, simply just to sort of let tensions calm for a minute, because it was, frankly, it was interesting as we've talked about earlier. A lot of these commissioners' hearings have been very, very, I dare say, dull. And Ribera's hearing, she was the very last batch. Was a very dramatic affair almost. There was really like you can definitely tell there was some political friction in the room. And I think sort of coming out of that, maybe everyone needs to have a chance to take a breath.
And after all these days of hearings and negotiations, what can we realistically expect to see next week or next days even?
I guess you will have to ask this question to the COP today at 9.
Yeah, I think there's it can go one of three ways. One way is that it's gonna go as calmly as it has until this point, and everything is gonna go just fine. Maybe there's gonna be a few changes to a title here and there, but otherwise it's gonna be fairly undramatic. Then there is a chance where you might see some sort of escalation. You might actually see Fito being demoted and having his executive vice presidency taken away from him. That's sort of the middle option as I see it. And then there is a real possibility of the whole House of Cards coming down.
Extreme.
The extreme option of the whole House of Cards coming down. Peter Liese told reporters when we were talking to him, he had actually thought that they would find some sort of common ground on Ribera, but he wasn't so convinced just now. I mean, obviously he has to say this. It is obviously also a spin from his side, but it is telling nonetheless of how the stakes are higher now than they were just a few days ago.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Evi Kiorri, and this was Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. You can get in touch with us by leaving a comment or review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work, but also understand what topics you like listening to. This episode was produced by Miriam Sainz Tejada, Charles Cohen, and me. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the long weekend, and we will be back on Tuesday morning, always at 6 a.m. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.